another Jew and Gentile podcast. I am your host, Chris Katulka, and with me is none other than the Jewish sage himself, the one and only Mr. Steve Herzig. How are you, sir?
I am really good, Chris. I'm glad to be here, and I asked the chayball.
Okay.
We know what the chayball is,
Yes,
right?
yeah. For someone tuning in for the first
They
time,
might not know what the chayball. I'm not talking about a drink.
That's right.
We're talking about the 8-ball when we were younger, and we asked it questions. So I asked the chayball, how's it going to go today?
This is the Yiddish version
This
of
is
the...
Yiddish version, the chayball, which means life. Chaim means life. So I asked the chayball, how's it going to go? And it says, why not?
Why?
So who knows?
Welcome in. Why not? That's right. Why not have a great episode? Or why not this thing just bomb, okay?
Why not?
Why not?
Or the last time I asked it, it said, E-H.
That's right.
What? That's a great Jewish word.
Is fet on there?
Fet, I haven't seen fet. But, you know, the thing with fet or is if you say it, you miss the meaning. You have to, we're on camera, Chris, and for those people who watch on YouTube, or if they're equippers.
FOI Equippers.
Right? When you say or fet, you got two hands, you got to go
Yeah.
or fet. If you just say it, you miss part of the meaning. But when you say it and you could see the person, fet.
Well, we don't want you to fed this because we want you to go to foiequip.org and become an equipper. Last week, Steve accused me of not sharing information with him.
Well, people talk to you. They don't. No one talks to me. I get butt kissed.
You know, I started thinking about this on the drive home. Is that I told you how good we're doing. People are signing up.
That's all you said is, yeah, people, we're doing good. People are signing up. Have a good day. I got nothing. I need individual reports here. Who's saying what?
I am telling you right now, people are still... I've just got a buzz on my phone.
How do they say anything? What do they do? They have to text, right?
No, they don't.
What's the number they have to text?
You're thinking about...
424.
No, wait a minute. You're thinking about too many things at one time. I'd like to just say that people are signing up for FOI Equip and becoming equippers by going to foiequip.org. And look, I'm getting all these... Look at all these people who are signing up.
Well, read a couple of them.
Well, we got Pastor Ted. We've got Nancy Mitchell. We've got Athelina Henze. Oh, that's a good one. I love that name. Ed Palsgrove, Brian Conrad, Michelle James, Joe Fine.
So what are you making? What are they saying?
They're signing up. It's letting me know that they're signing up to become a equipper.
Signing up.
That's right. This is not text messages.
Okay.
Now let's go to text. So wait a minute. Let me wrap this little thing up. If you go
how do they get FOIEquip.org?
That's right.
That's how they become equippers.
They can go online and get all of our classes, all of the notes, all the slides by going to foiequip.org. And if you'd like to text us to let us know what you think of FOI Equip, you can text the Jew and Gentile text number 424-444-1948.
Let's do it again.
All right, here we go.
424-444-1948.
You know, I showed that my kids once that we did that, and my son looked at me and said, cringe. Cringe.
What are you going to do? You got an elder cocker here who is an old guy, and you got the guy who's Mr. Technology himself. So put it together, and what do you got?
Cringe.
Bippity-boppity-boo.
You got cringe. Hey, everybody, be sure to go to foiequip.org, sign up, become an equipper, and we'll share more about that, I'm sure, in a little bit. Oh, man, some of my lunch just came up there. Hello.
Oh, man,
just in my lip.
What are you doing?
I'm so
For
sorry.
For sure that will be a cringe. We just lost
That's a cringe.
all 7 of them.
Yeah.
They're gone. It's over.
Well,
Don't bring that up again.
Well, here's the thing. Speaking of lunch, let's talk about the fact that people are going to be barbecuing. They're going to be barbecuing for the 4th of July.
The 4th of July is coming up. And Chris, you know, we had we're not political here, but we know in the United States we had a debate last week, and boy,
go ahead.
Lots of stuff going on. And one side was definitely saying, "Oh yeah." I can
That's
tell
the way
you
a lot of people were feeling, I think. So,
and many of us are feeling that way. But I heard a statement, and Chris, I wanted to bring it up in light of July 4th. America, the United States. So one of the things I did is I went online I remember in civics class and in a number of American history classes in public school. Plus, we don't live very far from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Cradle of Liberty.
That's right. And so I went online to once again look at our Declaration of Independence. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but Chris, this document, you talk about genius. It's not inspired. Inspired is the Bible. God, that is a God book. But amazing, it is amazing writing that it is still as relevant today as the time it was written. Just listen. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness.
Wow.
And it goes on. That's just a dynamic writing. And I was thinking about July 4th and where America is in light of the debate we had. And here's a statement I want us to kind of, and ask our audience if they would text us on
424-444-1948.
Here's the statement. God is our greatest hope and our greatest threat. Now that applies to Israel specifically. And we're going to talk about the land of Israel today as we go through the common thread, which has been a real joy for me. I'm sure, why don't you, before we even do that, tell us a little bit about the filming of the common thread. That was about, 4 years ago?
2018, actually.
Wow. So it's approaching 6 years ago.
6 years ago, yeah.
Yep. And you went with a group of our staff to film. Mm-hmm. You got permission. There's drones flying up and filming you in each specific spot. Tell us a little background of that.
Yeah, it was going to Israel for a different reason than I've ever done before. And so, like you said, we had to get permissions in order to use the drone in certain places. We had to show up at like some of the parks, the Israeli parks where the biblical sites are, like Caesarea Maritima and certain other areas to get a Dan. Tell Dan we had to get there very early, because they would let us film drone footage as long as the park wasn't open. So they would open the park for the drone, and then once the park opened for the public, they shut it off. You have to shut it down. And so we got there early to do that. And the filming was fun, and it could be stressful at times because, we kind of knew where we wanted to do the filming. And if you've never seen the common thread, it's filmed in Israel and various sites throughout Israel. And you want to get just the right site to do just the message that you want to convey. But I can remember the day that we were supposed to do it around, it was for the message about the common thread and how Jesus fits into the common thread. And it was interesting because we were like, all right, well, let's go down to the Sea of Galilee. So we go to a beach, and the Sea of Galilee, it can be windy.
Very.
And so it was extremely windy. I mean, blowing, my hair all over the place and blowing the camera all over the place. And then on top of that, there were Israelis that were trying to just have a good time at the beach. And so they're cranking their music as loud as possible. And we kept trying to make it work. And eventually we said, we got to get out of here. So we drove back as fast as we possibly could to my favorite hotel on the Sea of Galilee, which is Kibbutz En Gev. And we filmed it from there. And it turned out just fine. It was right on the sea. Beautiful picture. But you get stressed because you're working with very little time. The sun's going down, and you don't realize when you're filming, it eats up a lot of time. You're just trying to get the camera right. You're trying to get the message right. You're trying to, you mess up. You got to go back and do it again. All these takes that you have to do. And
everything we don't do on the Jew and the Gentile podcast.
100%. If we did this in Israel, it would be so much easier than filming the common thread. But all that to say, it was a great experience, a great team of the production staff at Friends of Israel who went over. and we did some fun things that I hope if you get a chance to watch the DVD or the streamable version that you will be encouraged by it, because it did take a lot of work. I think I averaged out, it was about 5 to 7 takes per message. So that's a lot. It's a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah. So tell us, how can our listeners get it free?
Yeah, well, they have to become Tikva volunteers.
Okay, so what's but they can actually get the common thread free.
That's right. They can get,
but they have to do something.
That's right.
So it does cost, but it doesn't cost money.
No, everything is still free. We still give it all away.
But there is cost.
There is a cost. You have to take, cost is your time doing bridges, our 9-week Jewish training.
Which, by the way,
ministry training.
Started yesterday, Tuesday night.
That's right.
So people can't do it right now, but there'll be another session
in
this
October.
year. But it just started yesterday, first of 9 straight weeks. And any of those graduates who then go on to Tikva could get common thread.
100%. So it's very easy to do. And so once you go through bridges and you graduate from bridges, which is, it's a lot of fun, but it depends on how much work you want to put into it. Then you're eligible to become a Tikva volunteer. And once you get your Tikva box, there's a little tiny brochure on there that says get your free download of the common thread online, and you can watch it there. So
that's really good. And so the question is, as we think of July 4th, as we think of Israel, God is our greatest hope. God, of course, chose the nation of Israel, and he is their hope. God, how many times in the Torah does it say, "Thus saith the Lord"? I am he. I am the Lord your God. Mm-hmm. And so God is our greatest hope, but he's also our greatest threat. And
that's
America,
the statement that you have there. God is our greatest hope and our greatest threat.
And our greatest threat. And I had to think about that and to think, well, wait a minute. So we have on our money, in God we trust. We have a foundation that if you go to Washington, D.C. and look at the monuments, that at least right now are hopefully not all defaced, but the ones that, looking at our monuments, you'll find Bible verses all over the place. The marks of God connected to this country are absolutely amazing. There are people who came, who helped found this country. God is their hope. They trusted in God. But at the same time, God could be our greatest threat. Why would God be a threat to us? Well, he could be a threat to us when we're not obedient to what he wants us to do. He could be our worst enemy or our greatest hope. What do you think of that?
Well, what comes to mind is Deuteronomy 28, because I think you're spot on. Because the reason I love Deuteronomy 28 is called the blessings and cursings passage. And the reason so we're talking about Israel right now. We're not talking about other nations, but I do think in light of Israel and seeing how God would relate with his chosen people and the land he wants to give them and the blessings he wants to give his chosen people, I'd also say that the same could be said of us, that there are blessings and cursings in many ways. They're not biblical wrapped up here. This is to Israel and very defined, but definitely blessings and cursings. And I find it fascinating. I always like to say this is like what it's like driving in the Katolka car, okay? If you guys behave, we'll go and we'll get ice cream, a blessing. But if you don't behave, when you get home, you'll put the laundry away. You'll put the dishes in the dish. You'll do this, and the kind of thing that makes a kid cry, no more chores, please. But we just lay out all of the and they go in severity. Oh, but if you do this, you'll be in your room. You'll be taking this will be taken away. And so the list of blessings in Deuteronomy 28 is 14 verses. 14 verses is all the blessings. The rest of the chapter, which is more than 64 verses, I have to see here.
It's Surahs.
There's 68 verses. So 14 of them are blessing. If you follow me, I will be your greatest hope. But if you cross me and you do not do the things that I've commanded you to do, God spends verse 15 through 68 cursing them, which is their greatest threat. So that's what comes to my mind when I think God our greatest hope, God our greatest threat. God's holiness is nothing to be messed with. I think it actually all goes back to his holiness and who he is. You can't. What's the word I'm looking for? God's justice and holiness and all of it. It can't be manipulated. It's either going to pour out the blessings that he promised through his commands, or it's going to be the reverse. You've crossed me. You've acted treasonous against me in sinning and choosing other gods and all this. Therefore, a threat is coming.
It's just a little word, Chris. Just 2 letters. If.
Yeah.
If. It's all round up, all put together in the, if you follow me, then this will happen. If you don't, then this will. That's what Deuteronomy 28 is all about.
Yep.
And as we think of July 4th and what the founders did, again, we're not talking theology here. All the founders had a belief in God. I'm not necessarily Christians, but they had a belief, and they had profound respect for the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think of the history of our country's been called the Great Experiment, and it is a country by the people and for the people, with its foundation at least rooted in the Scriptures. And so I find that there's been no country like ours. That's why so many people want to come here. Mm-hmm. There's, even if they don't fully understand it, my ancestors, your ancestors, came here because they knew that America was different. Now, again, Israel is God's, there's only one nation chosen by God, Israel. That's it. But God is God of all nations, and I think and believe that God raised up America for such a time as this. And really, Chris, the establishment of America in all of world history is just a minuscule of time. It's not, we haven't been around.
We're not even 250 years. We're not even 200. I mean, Israel was in Egypt. They're just reaching their halfway point by the time our country is where it is today.
Exactly. But I still believe that the principle, and so as we think of the Constitution as when it was written, and as we think of the United States of America, it's a great reminder to me that God is our greatest hope, and as individuals, regardless of where you live, He can be your personal living God as we trust Him as our Savior, but also He could be our greatest threat.
100%. And I thought that was very fascinating. And we were talking about this before we got started, is yes, a lot of the scriptures are talking more in light of Israel and God's hope and threat. But the same thing can happen to Gentile nations. We see that in the book of Daniel. You were mentioning Nebuchadnezzar. We're talking about the fact that actually the nations, it says in Joel that the nations will be judged actually for how they treated God's inheritance and his people. And this is the big one that's so fascinating, how they divided up my land, he says in Joel chapter 3. Again, so God's talking about a judgment for how the nations not only treat God, but treat his people, because really the two are the same. If you treat God's chosen people a certain way, you have a love and appreciation for who he is because of what the scriptures teach about his people.
Well, we'll be talking in the news about other nations and specifically things that are happening politically in other nations that revolve around the Jewish people. It's just so interesting.
You know what you're really good at? You just set people up for the news. You're telling them to stick around.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Congratulations. You're really good at marketing on the podcast.
Hey, even a blind squirrel gets a nut every now and then.
All right, so we're going to the common thread. We've already looked at Genesis chapter 12 and 15 as we looked at the promise and covenant that God made to Abraham, and it's eternal covenant. It's God's name written on the deed of the land of Israel. That's the reason it can't be revoked. That's the reason the land really belongs to the Jewish people, according to the scriptures, is because actually it's not their name written on the deed. It's not their name written on the promise. It's God's name. The writer of Hebrews says this, that God could swear, when it came to the promise that God made to Abraham, God could swear by nothing greater than his own name. So he puts his own reputation, his own holiness on the line to make sure that this promise is fulfilled, which includes land, descendants, the Jewish people. So the land of Israel, the descendants, Jewish people, and the multifaceted blessing. And the reason this is so important is because part of that blessing is not just a blessing of protection, that God would protect his people. I'll bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you, but also a divine promise that Abraham, I'm giving you a job. And it's a big job. I'm choosing you, that through you and your descendants, all the families of the earth would be blessed. And so this is the reason it has to be God's name on the dotted line. Because if Abraham's name was on there as a cosigner, this thing would have broken a long time ago.
Stillbirth.
That's
it would
right.
have been a stillbirth.
100%.
But in the Common Thread study guide, it opens up as we would open up in session 3. I liked what it says here, ancient Israel and the mission. And then it says, real estate rule number 1. Location, location, location. Chris, I know you love the location you're living in personally, in your home, in the neighborhood where you are, the people, the access to the various things that you need for everyday life. I know that when we selected where we live, it's accessible to the expressways, and you could get east, north, south, west, whichever direction, very quickly. And so location is very important. And so it says, God blessed the descendants of Abraham with the land of Israel, whose central location was part of God's plan for his people to reach all nations. This session, from Tel Megiddo, the gateway to the entire world, explains how Israel's divine role was to become a kingdom of priests standing between God and humanity. Do you remember the time you filmed right there at Tel Megiddo? Tell us a little bit about that. And we always take people, although there hasn't been tours to Israel because of the war, but we go up to the top of Megiddo, you look out, you could see you could see Nazareth, where Jesus grew up, overlooking the Jezreel Valley. That place, Armageddon, what a place. God sovereignly placed his chosen people into his chosen land, just as you stated. Very important, a land to a people. He's giving them that land, but his name is on it.
His name is on it. And the reason that we highlight the land is because I think a lot of people, when you become a Christian and you begin to read the Bible, you don't really think about the land. When you're just getting into the word. Now, I know that you grew up in a Jewish home, an Orthodox Jewish home, so I'm sure, the land of Israel was very much a part of the upbringing that you had.
We had our pushka box. We were giving, back then when I was in elementary school, every week, bringing a dime to fill up a little card, which was $2, and then a tree would be planted in Israel. Israel, very important to the Jewish people, the diaspora Jews who were outside of Israel. And isn't it interesting?
But that was embedded into the way that you went to synagogue and you thought about the way you worshiped God and all.
100%.
Hearing the words Erets, Israel. I'm sure you heard that growing up.
All the time.
And so, but for a Christian like myself, when you grow up, and I was in a church that supported Israel and the Jewish people, but when you talk about the land, it's almost like it's like something from the Old Testament, and it's a word that we use, the promised land. And the promised land can kind of become, God's going to lead us all to the promised land. And it kind of gets smoothed out when you get to the New Testament, and it doesn't have the same impact that it does in the Old Testament. I would argue differently. What I try to show in the common thread is that the land is like a character in the Bible. It has its own place in the Bible. It's not just the land. It's that the land becomes incredibly important to the story of redemption from Genesis 12 all the way through to Revelation. It's not something that just gets, pushed away because now Jesus came, we don't need this land anymore. I don't think that was Jesus's mission, to undo the land. I think Jesus came to be the fulfillment of what God had promised Abraham, but that included the land, that included the descendants, that included the blessing. And so, again, when we're talking about the land, I've had people come up to me at church when I speak about the importance of Israel, the land. They come up and they go, God, do you really think God is still in the real estate business? And yes, it is important. It's very important because God's going to do something from that place, especially in the Old Testament, and I believe in the New Testament as well. But he's doing something amazing. And that's, God could have said, which I think is amazing. He chooses Abraham. He says, Abraham, if you step out in faith, I'll give you the land, descendants, blessing. And you could think, all right, well, where are we going? He says, I'm going to take you to a place that I'm going to show you. You could think this is when God spins the globe and just kind of points his finger somewhere. And maybe you're hoping he lands on Fiji or Hawaii or somewhere. But he lands in Israel. But
yeah, where do our people go in the United States when they retire?
Yeah.
The suburb of New York, Florida.
Yeah, Miami, Boca.
That's right.
But that's the point is that God choosing Israel and this land is actually incredibly significant to the promise that he made him. Abraham, through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. So I'm going to put you, Abraham, in a place to be that blessing. And that's what the land of Israel becomes. And I think we're going to develop this more in this conversation. But why is this land so important? Why did God choose this one slice of pie in the entire globe? It's got really important significance.
Well, Ezekiel chapter 5 tells us that Israel is the center of the earth. Mm-hmm. And within that center of the earth, God placed an area, geographic area within his land that is so unique, connecting 3 continents. And this particular location, archaeologists have found that there's like 22 to 25, something like that, civilizations that have been there because of its location, and you were there to film.
Yeah, so it's called Tel Megiddo. So here's what Steve's talking about. The land becomes so important because the land is actually a bridge. Israel is a bridge. It's a land bridge that bridges what is known as Persia, which is modern-day Iran, with Turkey and Europe. And it bridges those northern countries down into Ethiopia and Africa, North Africa, and Egypt. So if you were to try to bring your spices and your goods or an army through up to the north or wherever you wanted to go and trade, there was only one way for you to go if you were living in Europe or you were living in Persia or you were living in Egypt or you were living in Ethiopia, wherever. If you wanted to get anywhere, you had to go through Israel. So God plants his people in his land, gives them a purpose, gives them a call, gives them the law to live by, and says, obey this law. And if you obey this law, then the nations will come to you. I'm going to stream them through you, and they're going to see you, and they're going to say, what God do these people serve? That's when they get to be a blessing. And one of the ways that we know that this land is so significant is this place called Tel Megiddo, which is in the Jezreel Valley. When you're there's an ancient highway system called the Via Maris, or the International Trunk Road, which is another name of it. And that was right along the coast of Israel from Egypt, and right along the coast through Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, and it'd go all the way up to where Tel Aviv is, and go further north. And then at some point, you reach the end, and you hit a mountain called Mount Carmel. So you got to turn right to go into the Jezreel Valley. And there's one little tiny pass called the Aruna Pass. It's a very thin pass that breaks you through the mountains and out into the Jezreel Valley. And once you get there, there's a city called Megiddo. And Megiddo is so important because it basically controls all international trade. If you control Megiddo, you control all international trade. Why? Because you're forced into this valley. If you're trading goods, you're bringing silk, you're bringing spices, whatever, your fabrics, your armies. As you're going through, you have to go through that tiny pass, and there is the guy with the toll booth saying, pay up, buddy, or else you're not going through. And so we know this is important because there are 26 layers of civilization in this thing called a tell. A tell almost looks like a hill, a mountain, but it's fake. And the reason why it's fake is because in the ancient day, when the Canaanites built a town like Megiddo, all of a sudden, what happens? Somebody goes, I'm going to fight the Canaanites and take that strategic location. So they come in, they burn down their houses, the houses fall, the ashes on top of it. And then what do? They come in, and the people that beat the Canaanites, they build a level on top of that. And then another group comes in, burns it, it falls, they build on top. And this happens so many times, 26 layers of civilization.
Including Solomon's. Solomon, there's great evidence of the horse stables that he had up there. You know, we live in the tri-state area, Chris. We have New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. Tri-state. Well, this is the tri-continent area.
Yeah.
This, you have Asia, you have Africa, and you have Europe. And what you're describing is this toll booth, this they needed an easy pass.
Easy pass, that's
so
right.
But the problem is everybody wanted it, and they were looking to conquer whoever was controlling that. And so the key was to build your fort, your soldiers, and to make sure it's difficult. But evidently, 26 times it was defeated.
It was defeated. Yeah, it was fought up until World War I. They were fighting on Megiddo. And in fact, there's a great battle that's coming to Megiddo. And we might know it in the book of Revelation. They call it Armageddon, but that's because the Greek messes things up. In the Hebrew, it's Har, which means mountain, and Megiddo, the town of Megiddo. So there's a great battle, or the staging of a battle, that will take place at Har Megiddo, which is Megiddo, Tel Megiddo, which is what we're talking about. There's this place that's been fought over so many times for its strategic location, shows the value of why God chose that land. You know, I like to think of it almost like the internet. Today, you know, you go online, and all the wires, they go to a place where all the information is stored. And this is all over the world. But, you know, all the wires kind of take you to the information and then get dispensed out. Israel was the hub of God's goodness. Israel was supposed to be the hub of the information of who the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is, the creator of all things. And I can only imagine, Steve, you know, imagine an Egyptian or a Persian. They come into the land of Israel. They're on a journey. They're on with a trade group as they're coming into Israel, and they need to get a hotel. And it's Friday at 2:30 in the afternoon. So let's go get a hotel. And they show up. Maybe it's 4:00 now, and the guy that runs the hotel in Israel, this is thousands of years ago, goes, "We need a hotel room." Okay, great. Well, you've got about 10 minutes, and then we're shutting this thing down. What do you mean you're shutting it down? It's Friday. Well, because we honor our God by closing everything. We're done, you know, and we worship God from Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. Wait, what do you mean that you're shutting down? People won't shut down. We shut down. We are going to worship our God.
They were the Chick-fil-A of their day.
100%. And everyone drives by on Sunday and says, we should get Chick-fil-A, and it's closed. But then they go, all right, well, the kitchens must be closing, so I'll take a ham and cheese sandwich or a sausage egg, whatever. Nope, we don't do ham. What do you mean you don't do ham? Everybody does ham. We don't do ham. We don't eat pig. We don't eat camel. What do you mean? We do this to honor our God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I promise you, when those people left that hotel and moved on to the next country, I promise you they said, have you heard of these people, the Israelites, the Hebrews, and the God that they serve? They don't eat this food. And they stop and they worship him from Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. It was designed, these laws, if they were to obey them in the land, were designed to be a testament to who the creator God was. That's why the land is so important, because God said, if you just obey me and you stay in the land, I'm going to bring the world to you, not the other way around.
You know, Chris, when you stand at the top of Megiddo and look down, you could see that path, that road that you're talking about, the Via Maris. But you're also looking at one of the most fertile areas in the world. It's called the breadbasket of Israel. Mm-hmm. And so you could picture a exact story that you're making up with the hotel and all that, but truth to it. Couldn't you imagine, wait a minute, these people not only worship this God, but look at how he's blessing them. They are a blessed people. I wonder if I could get acquainted with this God. God wasn't sending Israel to go tell people about him. He was bringing people for them to tell about him.
Exactly.
And the problem was the direct opposite. When they did so, they left the land. They got kicked out of the land in judgment. And the idea of the land is to be there in the land in blessing. And that's where Ezekiel 37 comes in. We've talked about that on the podcast already. But it's really interesting the way we think of biblical history and then think of what's happening in current events. And you know, what goes around comes around. there's a lot of symmetry to what's happening today and how God operated then and how he will end operations, really the beginning, as we think of Armageddon.
Yeah. And so the land becomes, to me, it's a character in the Bible that needs to be treated as a character in the Bible. It's not something that people are, walking on. God was bringing people to the land so that they could see the goodness of who he is. It's funny, Steve, you might disagree with me on this, but Jesus says that, in John chapter 1, it says that Jesus is grace upon grace. And I read this commentary once that said, oftentimes we kind of like the law, the law, that's the Old Testament. God's done with that. It only is a taskmaster. The law, but really a Jewish person would never think of the law that way. Nope. Never. The law to a Jewish person. And I would say the same thing for Jesus. The law was something of grace. God revealed himself to his people. He didn't have to do that. He gave them the 10 Commandments, which tells them how to worship God and how to treat one another. This is God's, how should you love your neighbor? How should you treat them is grace that God would share that because it comes from his wisdom. It comes from his character, his nature. How we worship him is embedded in the law. And so grace is, you could look at the law and oftentimes we say, no, that's the law. That's not grace. Well, it was certainly God's chesed to even give Moses and the people the law. And then Moses didn't even come down with the tablets for the first time, and they already broke the law. And God shows what? His chesed. He shows his grace, even though they don't deserve it. Again, you see this constant. And so when Jesus says he's grace, when John says Jesus is grace upon grace, here's the law that's already been here, which is God's revelation to us. But now God is walking among us. He's living out the law, which is grace upon, overloaded grace in who Jesus is. So, when you think about the law, when the Israelites are living out the law, the way that the law, or if they were to live out the law and obey it, and God would bless them, what you're seeing, as you're saying, you're a Gentile who comes through the land, you're seeing the abundance of the food they're eating. You're seeing the rain coming down from heaven. You're seeing the enemies running in 7 different directions when they try to attack Israel. You're seeing all of these blessings over and over and over again. You can't help but go, what God do these people serve? I gotta know. And that's the way Abraham would be blessing the nations, but ultimately would come in the person and work of Jesus Christ.
Well, you're segueing to a advertisement that I'm about to give.
Oh boy.
In Proclaim. Our Proclaim conference is talking about messianic prophecies, and one of the messages is on messianic prophecies in relationship to the law.
That's right.
To the law.
Did you have to do that one?
I have to do that one.
You have to, or you had?
No, I have to.
Okay.
Future tense, September. But it is interesting, and that's what is spoken about in the Common Thread Study Guide. It says this: most scholars believe the Mosaic covenant between God and Israel at Mount Sinai is divided into 3 major sections: ceremonial laws, civil laws, moral laws. But God gave many laws that don't fit neatly into any of these categories. And he's going to write about the law, the blessing that it is, and about the purpose of the Israelites to be the priestly people, to be the intercessor between the nations and God, to show them who he is.
I really believe that the land, even in the New Testament, still matters. I was just looking at somebody, I'm on this app called Academia, where people can post their whatever. You could be the specialist in space, and you can post your papers. And people post papers all the time, so you get to read what people are writing about. And I saw one in this. I'm in the more theological section of this website, and somebody posted about Israel and the land, and they were talking about Romans 9-11, and he said there's no sign of the land there at all in Romans 9-11. God's done with the land. And I'm sitting there thinking, man, that is a very quick assumption. Number one, I think that the deliverer would come to Zion, which is mentioned right there in Romans 9-11 or in Romans 11. But then it also mentions that the gifts and call of God are irrevocable. The fact that God, even though that the Jewish people, it says, are the enemies of the gospel, the gifts and call of God are irrevocable because of the love that he has for the fathers, for the ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Well, what does that mean? Land, That's Abraham's promise: land, descendants, and a blessing. So, I think what happens is we try to push the land out and we don't think it matters. But I always try to remind people, imagine if you said to an American, as we're thinking about 4th of July, Washington, D.C. doesn't matter anymore. We're done with Washington. Washington doesn't matter. Let's get rid of it. Let's just spread this thing out.
There are Americans who think that now. There definitely are.
But they're saying, let's spread it out. That's the point. Let's just, we don't need Washington anymore. Let's just, we don't need that area. Washington is so important because it's the representation of everything that every state is supposed to be. It's supposed to represent everybody in how we connect with the government. To me, what Jerusalem is, the reason Ezekiel 5:5 is there, the reason that it talks about the importance of the land is because, and the prophet Micah, talking about the fact that in days in the future, God will raise Jerusalem up above basically every city, and all the nations will stream to Jerusalem to receive what? Instruction, Torah, the law. And who will be the one distributing it? The king of Israel. Who is that? Jesus. So, of course, Israel still matters. It is the place where instruction to all the nations to maintain peace in the world, to maintain the structures that are God's ways of thinking and doing and acting and wisdom come from Jerusalem, not from all the various Gentile nations, but from Jerusalem, which will be raised up. Why? That's the reason the land is still important. Or else, what's the point of a Jerusalem?
Hey, 10 Gentiles are going to grab the clothing of a Jewish person and want to worship at tabernacles.
100%. And they're going to say, take me there. I want to go right now.
Yep.
Why? Because that's where we want to go see where the importance of the law, the importance of the word of God is lived out, so that it actually says so that there's peace among the nations. How does Jesus maintain peace? We live by his wisdom. That's an amazing thing to think about. So anyway.
Especially nowadays where there is no peace anywhere.
That's right. Exactly. Well, Steve, that's been a very productive conversation.
Yep.
We've got some news. Maybe people have been hanging on to get to the news because of your great, setup that you did there earlier.
Oh, yeah, right. Well, let's just start off with, I think it's on my mind. It has been. We did it last week, too. We're going back to France, Chris, because of the election that they had in France and the current situation with how the French view the Jewish people historically at the last World War II. There was anti-Semitism in France. 1897, Theodore Herzl goes down there and finds out that there's anti-Semitism against one of their own soldiers and accused him of falsehoods and sentenced him to, I forgot the island where he went, but he was sentenced. And anti-Semitism, it's back to being a problem. And Macron, here's the headline in the Times of Israel, Macron's implicit endorsement of anti-Semitic, pro-Hamas, far-left shocks French Jews.
I'm going to tell you, French Jewish people cannot win. They've got it probably on the far right, and now they've got it on the far, of course, the far left. They've got a huge Muslim population that can't stand Israel and the Jewish people. The French Jewish population for probably a decade now, Steve, have been trying to plan their escape from France because of how bad the anti-Semitism is over there. And now you're seeing a president who's been middle of the road, a moderate for a long time, is trying not to let Le Pen and her party come into power. There she is right there. And so he votes, he sides with a more leftist group, and what they say about Israel and the Jewish people is just horrible.
It is. This is so interesting. We do have representatives in France, and we talk to them on a weekly basis about what's happening. But it says here, but now many French Jews feel betrayed by Macron, who last week announced snap parliamentary elections that backfired and boosted the far right. So you got the far right, which have been known to be anti-Semitic, but Chris, it's becoming worse on the left. And so you have Jewish people saying, where do we go? Mm-hmm. What do we do? Who are we going to go with? Mm-hmm. They have to go with what they regard as the lesser evil. It says it began with the European Parliament elections of June 9th. The far-right National Rally Party of Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardella won the largest share of the vote, 32%. So, Chris,
this is all of Europe too. Europe is on they're on a kick right now, shedding itself of the left progressive
Italy
government.
just did that.
Italy, Germany, and now France here as well. It's interesting. I had just mentioned the fact that this has been going on for more than a decade. Listen to this from the same article. About 50,000 French Jews have made aliyah, which means they've immigrated to Israel over the past decade, more than double the tally of the previous one. But France has a robust welfare system, you don't say, and offers a relatively high quality of life that is helping to keep at home another 50,000 who are considered leaving as the political climate darkens around them. You can only drink so much French wine and have so much French cheese until finally you go, I think my life is on the line here. I'm going to Israel. And that's what's happening. 50,000 Jewish people in 10 years have said, I'm out of here from France. And there's only 50,000 left, it seems like it's saying. And so they're saying the welfare system keeps them around, the quality of life keeps them around, but it's not quality of life if you're constantly under threat. You can't even wear a kippah. They tell you don't wear a kippah as a Jewish person walking around. That's dangerous. That's not even freedom.
No, 100%, but we have what happened in the 30s as well. The war started September 1st in Poland, and by 1942, I believe, Hitler was in Paris. And the question always is, when you study the Holocaust, the question always is about when did Jewish people realize that the writing's on the wall and they had to get out? Even in our own history here at Friends of Israel, Chris, 1938, the founders of Friends of Israel were meeting German Jews in Philadelphia. And those were the ones that got out between 1933 and 1938. Kristallnacht takes place, and then it's too late.
Well, do you remember during that movie that we saw, Commandant Shadow, when we had our movie, we had our, what do they call that? We had the movie night that we did for FOI Equip.
Yep.
The lady who is the Holocaust survivor was looking at pictures of her family, and there she goes, oh, this is a friend. This is my dad's best friend and my mom's best friends, and we grew up together. And he goes, but he was much smarter than my dad. He left before, he saw the writing on the wall and left. My parents didn't, and they ended up dying. She survived because she was a cellist in Auschwitz. But her family perishes, but the friends who said, we're seeing the writing on the wall here, they got out and were able to save themselves, essentially.
That's right. But the decision, especially when you read headlines like this and see the dilemma that Jewish people have, you're weighing in your mind all the years. The Jewish people in France are French. They're Jewish, and that's important to them, depending on the family. But the idea of leaving, the idea of this is what I know, I got to go to another country, another language. At least today they have a choice. Mm-hmm. The choice was much less then, and there's all kinds of stories of people who got out and were on a boat and got sent back anyway because they weren't welcome in any other country. There is now a country for Jewish people.
We've been talking about France, but this isn't in our news. But did you know that Germany just passed a law that says if you want to become a citizen of Germany or receive a German passport, you have to check a box or say something, I don't know what it is, that you say, I believe as a German that Israel has the right to exist.
I acknowledge Israel.
That's right.
That's the only country right now that's doing that.
That's right. That's because there's so much anti-Semitism in Germany right now, especially after the Holocaust, which, we know about the history there. They don't want the woman, Nancy Fraser or something like that, who's the interior minister, was saying people need to, if they're going to become Germans, they have to hold to German values. And the German values are that we support Israel and the Jewish people. We don't want anti-Semitism in this country. Now, of course, that comes with other, declarations as well, like gender equality and things like that. But the big thing is that it's saying, we don't want this anti-Semitism. We want Jews to feel comfortable here, not run off. And so, anyway, interesting.
Well, we go from anti-Semitism in France, and thank God, a country where Jewish people can go and be Jewish, Israel. So the headline here is Labor, a long name of a party in Israel. The founders who were there, Ben Gurion was of the Labor Party, and Erets merge into United Liberal Democratic Zionist Party. And what are they called, Chris?
Wait, say it again. Oh, the Democrats.
Hello, Chris.
I'm sorry.
Let me read it again. I'll give you another shot.
Okay,
Labor and Merits merge into United Liberal Democratic Zionist Party.
The Democrats.
The Democrats. They're going to name themselves the Democrats. And you and I, before we got on air, said,
I don't know if that's a good idea.
Is that a good idea? Do they want to be known as the Democrats?
This is a big move, actually, because you have to, when you study the history of modern Israel, it was primarily a very secular, what's the word I'm looking for, Steve? Secular, left-leaning government.
They were liberal.
Some of them even socialists. They were, liberal. The primary party for many, many decades was the Labor Party. I mean, we're talking about rock stars like David Ben-Gurion behind me.
Golda Meir.
And then the 90s roll around and things begin to shift. All of a sudden it moves from this more socialist utopia of Israel to capitalism starts to creep in. And I bet Benjamin Netanyahu had a bit to say about all of that.
100%. Chris, when I took my first trip to Israel in 1982, I met a guy who left the kibbutz. By the way, kibbutzim were very important in the foundation and founding of Israel. Long before they even became a country, there were kibbutzim. Well, the problem was, he said, he left. He said, I couldn't take it. They're communists. And this is in the 80s. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, everybody has to get the same amount, and it's all based on your children. So the doctor who goes to school all those years, he gets the same amount as the guy who's raking leaves. That's crazy. I wanted to go out, and if I didn't make it, I didn't make it. But if I did make it, I don't have to work my head off and then give it all to somebody else.
That's right.
And by the way, so they've discovered capitalism, and now in America, the capitalism is in danger of people who say, you know what? Let's sit back. And COVID was a great example of that. Without being political, just what happened.
Too late.
No, it did. The fact that everybody was home and the government said, hey, we'll help you while this disease goes through and you're home, we'll give you money. Well, they found out that when it was time to go back, people didn't. Wait, if I get money and do nothing,
I don't
why
wanna
should
work.
I go back?
That's right.
Well, in Israel, they've gone through all that, and labor is now the Democrats.
Well, that's right. The Labor, they lost so many seats. I don't even think they made it into the government last time.
The last I heard, they had 7 seats.
Yeah, so they have and that's Bupkis.
That's
Of
Bupkis.
120 seats, that's Bupkis, especially when you were once the largest party in the country.
They were in the 40s at one time.
Yeah, of 120 seats, they were what is that, 30%, 33% of the government at that time. And so, when you look at the span of the labor movement, by the 90s and early 2000s, the Labor Party begins to shrink. And what happens is these conservative parties start to grow. Likud, which is Benjamin Netanyahu's party, begins to grow. The conservative parties continue to increase. And what happens? The liberal, progressive, and labor parties begin to shrink and shrink and shrink to the point where they're almost nothing. And so now what's happening is these parties that were once very popular are now forced to collide with one another and become a bigger party. And that's what's happening. Labor and Merits are two liberal parties that are having the force to come together to become the Democrats.
And then when in our show notes, you'll give them a link to get onto this Times of Israel article, you'll see happy people. Yeah. They're all happy. Look at how happy. Yay, we're getting a bigger party.
That's exactly right. But this is important to say. I do appreciate this. It says the promise was welcomed by Meretz Secretary General Tomer Resnick. And he said this: the Zionist left is alive and well. We did not unite to return to Knesset. See, I think they got kicked out. I think in the last go-round, I don't even think Labor made it in.
Okay.
We did not unite to return to the Knesset. We united to return to power. The Zionist left is here to grow and get stronger, he tweeted, promising to become bigger and more influential than the Kanists. Now, this is interesting because I think last week we had talked about how there's shifting of power going on in the conservative end, which could really change the dynamic of the political spectrum. Do I think that Meretz and Labor are going to do anything? Probably not. I think
they'll do a little more than the religious parties who lost because of the Haredim being drafted.
That's true. But I don't think you're going to see. I think most people don't realize. I think most Israelis are very conservative individuals. The country has changed in the last 30 years.
No question about it. Well, so we continue in Israel, and there's a war going on, Chris, and we pray daily for the peace of Jerusalem. We at Friends of Israel have several of our representatives whose children are involved in actually fighting in Gaza and to the north. We don't want to forget the 100,000 people that have been away from their homes. Actually, some of them have had to go back to the north. There was a Christian group I read about that was paying for the hotel for them, and the money ran out, and they have to go back to the north where Hezbollah bombs daily.
Yep.
They're bombing daily, sending rockets over, and hardly anybody is talking about them. But in Hamas, in Gaza, where Hamas is, we find that the headline here is what Communist China's engineers were doing in Hamas's Gaza tunnels. We have a China connection, Chris.
The Israel Defense Forces captured 2 Chinese communist engineers inside Hamas's Gaza tunnel network, says Gurmontes Laliri, a former lieutenant colonel of the U.S. Air Force who is now based in Taiwan. Laliri made a claim on May 28, 2024, the webinar of the Committee on the Present Danger of China. There were 2 PLA engineers that they found in the tunnels, and China rapidly tried to put pressure on Israel to return them, and even tried to get the Russians to put some pressure on Israel to return the 2 guys, and they went back to China. Laliri said in the webinar, I don't think they were interrogated. I don't know for sure, but why are there 2 PLA tunnel engineers in Gaza? To me, that's very suspect. We can suspect that there were some involvement of China helping Hamas design these tunnels, and that went on for miles and miles, and were very sophisticated.
Chris, we find the axis of evil everywhere. You got Iran, now you got Russia and China, and all centered in Israel.
And I always like to remind people, Israel's in a tough, we talked about this before, Israel's in a tough place in the world because you can't escape. If there's a gravitational pull, they're stuck in the middle between the gravitational pull of the West and America and the gravitational pull of the East and China. They're in the middle of both of them. I remember when we were watching in the past few years of going to Israel, they were building that train that goes from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv and Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And you might think, well, why did they have a train doing that a long time ago? Well, you have to go through mountains, big mountains.
It took them a long time to build.
Years and years. But the problem was, you know who built it? China. It was a Chinese like China came in and influenced Israel. China was going to buy up one of the ports in Israel. You know, all of these, the China influence is very present because, again, that gravitational, it's right in the middle. Israel has always had the choice to either have to go to the West as allies or the East. Before the pandemic came, tourism was through the roof in Israel. And it wasn't just because Americans were going or people from the West. It's because Chinese Christians, they opened the door for Chinese Christians to come to Israel, and they were coming in the droves, and they increased the number of tourism. Why? Because there was a link there between Shanghai and Tel Aviv or Jerusalem. And so, again, I always feel bad for Israel because they're kind of in the middle of this tension that exists between the East and the West.
There's always tourists with our people. There's always, it's tension, high anxiety. That's in fact, Chris, before we do the Yiddish word,
okay.
I went to the Newish Jewish Encyclopedia, and a word that I've never heard before is in this dictionary, and it's called Ashkenormative. Ashkenormative.
Hey, I'm going to need a safe room for that.
Assuming that Jewish life and culture is limited primarily to the experiences and customs of Ashkenazi Jews. To some extent, most American Jews, of which I am one, even those who are not themselves Ashkenazi, I am Ashkenazi, fall prey to Ashkenormativity. Ashkenormativity.
You nailed that.
As Ashkenazi Jews have, since the late 19th century, constituted the great majority of American Jewry and been most prominent in Jewish religious and cultural life, but with increased immigration from the Middle East, Iran, and other religions, with overdue attention to the experience of historically overlooked groups. We really hope that Ashkenormative tendency is weakening. So, Chris, I'm disappointed. The newish Jewish encyclopedia, like our media, is going from information to opinion.
Yeah, 100%.
The last line, we really hope the Ashkenormative tendency is weakening. Don't tell me, don't give me your opinion. I'm neutral on that, but just tell us what it is. This is the encyclopedia, not the opinion page of a newspaper.
Of the Wall Street Journal. You know, this is important, though, because it is true. When you think about a Jewish person, you just go up, let's say you go up to a non-Jewish person, a Gentile, you say, when you think of a Jewish person, what comes to mind? I guarantee they go right for the black hat, the black coat, the tzitzit, the hair that come down. And that's Ashkenazi. That is Eastern European.
Eastern European.
That's right. They don't, and when you say words like Sephardic or Mizrahi, they go, what? You know,
they don't know what you're talking. Even there's some Jewish people who don't know what you're talking about. They only know matzo ball soup. That's all they know.
Which is Ashkenazi. Bagels, Ashkenazi.
Lox, Ashkenazi. Chopped liver.
Yeah, gefilte fish. They weren't eating that out there in the East, in Iraq and Iran. But the point, though, is that when you go to Israel, this is why Israel is so interesting when it comes to, you want to talk about a melting pot. When I would go over there for a month at a time when we were leading Origins, I was blown away by how many Mizrahi Jews there are. Those are from the Middle Eastern countries. And the culture is totally different.
Completely different.
And they all get angry with one another.
All the time.
About, you're saying the words wrong. The liturgy's done this way. You guys aren't the ancient people. We carry the original way of saying these Hebrew words. Feh to you, Ashkenazi, or the Ashkenazi fight back to the Sephardic or the Mizrahi. And the food is different. And the culture is different. Everything is different when it comes to how the Ashkenazi, Sephardic, Mizrahi relate with one another.
Now you understand why Moses had it so bad. How do you deal with these people?
Oh,
well, Chris, you were the one. I was going to pick a Yiddish word of the day, but you beat me, so you could take the honor.
Well, we did Israel, the land. And so, Jewish people in Hebrew, they say Erets Yisrael, the land of Israel. But in Yiddish, they have a way of saying it too. And it's Erets Yisroel. Yisroel. You have to put an O in there.
That's
Erets
right.
Yisroel. So I'm doing the Yiddish version of Erets Israel, the land of Israel. Erets Yisroel.
Which is exactly my Yiddish name and Hebrew name. Israel, Yisroel, and Erets Yisroel.
That's right. Well, your Yiddish, your Hebrew name is Israel Reuben.
Yep.
So it's Yisroel
Reuben.
Reuben. Okay. I cannot believe we have not highlighted that one. We need a Yisroel Reuben section of the podcast. Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for being a part of the Jew and Gentile podcast.
Happy Independence Week.
That's right. We should just say thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Be sure to go to foiequip.org, and there you can become an equipper. What does that mean? You get all of our classes, our FOI Equip classes, for free. You also get the downloadable slides and notes that come with the class. You can teach it to your Sunday school, or you can watch it alone. Whatever you want to do, it's yours. It's free.
And text us at 444.
No, 424.
424.
444.
1948.
That's right. 424-444-1948. Hey, everybody, we better get out of here while we're ahead. See you later.